Ever had someone, like, just completely blow your mind with how awful they were being? Like, their actions were so far beyond the pale, they caused, like, actual serious emotional harm.
Oof. Yeah, I think we all have a story about someone like that in our lives, right?
Totally. But what most people don't realize is that there's actually a legal concept designed to address those situations. Situations where someone's actions are so outrageous, they cross the line into, well, legal liability.
We're talking, of course, about intentional infliction of emotional distress, or, as the cool kids call it, IIED.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive on IIED. Because let's be real, it's one of those legal concepts that sounds kind of straightforward at first glance, but the deeper you dig, the more you realize just how complex and honestly kind of fascinating it really is.
You're not wrong. This isn't some open and shut legal issue. It gets to the very heart of how we define acceptable behavior in society.
100%. So to kick things off, let's imagine this. You're dealing with something truly awful, and it's wreaking havoc on your emotional well-being. It's got you completely turned upside down. That's where IAE comes in. But it's not as simple as someone just being a jerk or hurting your feelings.
Right. The law sets a very specific and very high bar for what qualifies as IIED.
And thankfully so, right? I mean, we don't want people running to court every time someone's a little mean.
Precisely. Everyday conflicts are a part of life. IIED is reserved for something far more serious.
So to really understand IIED, we've got to dig into the legal nitty-gritty, right?
Absolutely. We need to examine the core elements that make up an IIED claim. Think of them like a legal checklist that needs to be ticked off.
Let's talk checklist then. Hit me with element number one.
All right, element number one, outrageous conduct. We're not just talking about bad behavior here. We're talking about actions so extreme, so beyond the pale, that they'd make a normal person gasp and say, whoa, that's messed up.
So we're talking like next level awful, right?
Yeah.
Not just someone cutting you off in traffic and giving you the finger.
Exactly. It has to be truly shocking and outrageous. Think of it this way. If you were to tell a group of people about what happened and their jaws dropped in collective disbelief, then you might be in IIED territory.
Okay, so that's outrageous conduct check.
Hmm.
What about the intent behind these awful actions? Does the person have to be consciously trying to cause harm, or is it more nuanced than that?
That's a great question, and it brings us to element number two, intent or recklessness.
Ooh, recklessness sounds kind of juicy, legally speaking.
It is. So on the one hand, the person committing the act might be fully aware that they're causing harm, that they're being intentionally cruel. But on the other hand, it could also be a case of recklessness, where they may not have set out to cause distress, but they acted with a blatant disregard for the potential consequences of their actions.
So even if they didn't explicitly say, I'm going to mess you up emotionally, if their actions scream, I don't care if I break you, that still counts.
You got it. It's all about demonstrating that their actions, regardless of their specific intent, were so far outside the bounds of acceptable behavior that emotional distress was a likely outcome.
Okay, so we've got the terrible action and we've got the intent, or at least a blatant disregard for the consequences. But what about the harm itself? How does the law define emotional distress in this context? Because let's face it, everyone experiences emotional ups and downs. So where's the line?
That's where element number three comes in, severe emotional distress. And you've hit the nail on the head. It's not enough to just feel sad or upset. We're talking about severe and debilitating emotional harm that significantly impacts your ability to function in your daily life.
So what would be some real-world examples of that kind of severe emotional distress?
Imagine being unable to sleep, plagued by constant anxiety or fear, or experiencing panic attacks so severe that you can't even hold down a job. These are the types of debilitating consequences that go beyond everyday emotional bumps in the road. These are signs of serious emotional harm.
Wow, those are really heavy, long-lasting consequences. And that really underscores how IIED is about seeking justice for genuine and lasting harm. Not just getting someone into trouble for a minor slight, it's about holding people accountable for actions that have a real and devastating impact on another person's well-being.
Exactly. And you know, what makes IAED even more interesting is that it's often used as a sort of last resort in legal cases.
A last resort. What do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes you have a situation where someone's actions are so awful, so egregious, that they cause significant harm, but they don't neatly fit into other more specific laws, like, say, assault or harassment.
So it's like IAED swoops in to save the day when no other legal avenue will do.
In a way, yes. It acknowledges that even if an action isn't explicitly illegal under one specific law, it can still have absolutely devastating emotional consequences that deserve to be recognized and addressed by the legal system.
That makes sense. It's about making sure that justice is served, even in the really complicated, messy cases where it's not immediately clear which box to check on the legal forms. Speaking of complicated cases, we've got some real-life legal cases here that perfectly illustrate how IIED works in practice, right?
We do, and these cases are, well, they're not for the faint of heart. They really highlight just how extreme the behavior has to be to win an IIED case.
Okay, hit me with a case. Let's see what we're dealing with here.
All right, let's talk about Littlefield v. McGuffey.
Littlefield v. McGuffey. Okay, what went down in that case?
Well, you had a landlord who went on a racially motivated campaign of harassment against a prospective tenant.
Whoa. So not just your average, everyday discrimination. We're talking off the charts, awful.
You got it. And the court agreed. They ruled that the landlord's actions went so far beyond the pale, they were so extreme that they constituted outrageous conduct. It wasn't just about discrimination, it was about intentional infliction of emotional distress.
And that resulted in some hefty damages being awarded, right? Sending a clear message that this type of behavior won't be tolerated.
Absolutely. And then we have another very compelling case, Dickens v. Puryear.
What makes Dickens v. Puryear stand out?
Well, this case really highlights just how far-reaching IID can be because it involves threats of future harm, not just actions that have already happened. Basically, the court found that the threat to the plaintiff's life was so credible, so terrifying, that it created an immediate and very real fear of harm, which in turn caused severe emotional distress.
So even if the threat hasn't yet materialized into actual physical harm, the emotional distress caused by that threat is very real, and the law recognizes that.
Exactly. And both of these cases, they underscore a crucial point about IIED. We're not talking about a difference of opinion here or a casual insult or even just a bad day. We're talking about conduct so far outside the bounds of what's considered acceptable behavior that it inflicts genuine, lasting emotional harm.
Harm that can have a very real impact on a person's life, their well-being, their ability to function. And this brings us back to a point we discussed earlier, that crucial third element of severe emotional distress, right? It's not enough to just say, well, that made me feel bad. It has to be a big deal.
Right. And the source material actually dives into this in a section called Proof of Emotional Distress. It basically says that feeling bad, well, it's just not enough on its own to win an IID case. The distress has to be so severe that it significantly disrupts your life.
So for our listeners who might be thinking, okay, I've been wronged, time to take it to court, what are the big takeaways here? What do you really need to remember about IID?
3 words: outrageous, intent, severe. You've
Yeah.
got to have those 3 elements working together. First, the actions have to be outrageous, like jaw-droppingly shocking. Second, there has to be intent to cause harm, or at the very least, a total disregard for the potential consequences. And finally, the emotional distress caused by those actions. It can't just be a case of the blues. It has to be severe and truly life-altering.
Basically, if you're going to bring an IIE claim, you better be ready to back it up with some seriously compelling evidence.
100%. Because, and here's something to chew on as we wrap things up, one of the biggest challenges in IIED cases is figuring out how to draw a clear line between everyday disputes, which, let's face it, are just a part of life, and genuinely outrageous conduct that demands legal intervention. It's a balancing act, really. We want to protect people from genuine harm, but we also don't want to open the floodgates to frivolous lawsuits.
That's a really important distinction.
Right.
And it's a discussion that's still ongoing in legal circles today. So
Yeah.
anyone listening who's ever felt like they were on the receiving end of some seriously messed up behavior, just know that the law does offer some potential avenues for recourse. But as with most things legal, it's complicated.
Truth. And that's why it's so important to be informed, to understand your rights, and to seek expert advice if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're unsure of how to proceed.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the complex and at times kind of wild world of IED. It's been enlightening, to say the least. Until next time.